Today we're going to be talking about troubles in Massachusetts. This is, well, if we remember our chapter 4, we broke the colonies into 3 regions, and we really should remember their mindsets at this point. We've got New England. This is Massachusetts right here. The reason why they were here were for religious reasons. They were being persecuted, they were being mistreated back in Britain for their religious beliefs. They wanted to do things their own way, and they are very fervent about what they do. Mid-Atlantic, led by Pennsylvania, were much more accepting of other cultures and probably the easygoing of everything. So they became very multicultural, multilingual, very open part of the society. And then in the South, we're probably the closest to the British. They didn't have any problems. They just wanted to make money. They came over here to raise tobacco and whatever it is that they can make money. They kept the British religion, or the religion that was accepted in Britain, the Anglican Church. And so they really didn't have too many problems, and they had a close tie with Britain. Again, the mid-Atlantic, even though they were not happy about being, they were very open to a lot of things. Whereas it's very different in Massachusetts. These are the firebrand people, the very religious. They're so religious that you had to adhere to what they're talking about. And that's where we get Rhode Island. I say it again and again. Puritans that weren't pure enough for the Puritans got kicked out, and they've started their own state in Rhode Island. So it is a hot-headed area of the American colonies, and that's where we're going to see the real troubles. It's going to be in Massachusetts. All right, so let's start off with the Boston Massacre, 1770. We talked about certain issues here in the 60s, but now we're in the 70s. In 1770, there was a protest in front of an area where they collected taxes, and they were just kind of yelling at the sentry, the guard there, and they started throwing snowballs. So he called for help, and the rest of the guards showed up, and shots were fired. Now, the story goes is that some rocks were in the snowballs or ice or something, struck one of the soldiers so hard that he fell down, his gun went off, and then the other soldiers started shooting. And there we get the Boston Massacre. Now, when we think of massacre, here we have the definition: the brutal killing of several people at once. I think of a massacre, I think hundreds, thousands of people. That's a massacre. But as we can see here in the text, there were 3 dead colonists and then 2 more soon, so a total of 5. And any loss of life is too much, but that's hardly what I would think a massacre would be. But this is where we get our great propaganda here. The Boston Massacre, British soldiers just inhumanly shooting down unarmed American citizens. And so this now blood has been shed. This is different than protests or breaking someone's windows or whatever. Now people's lives have been lost, and not just 1, but 5. And so that is a massacre to the Americans. And so in Massachusetts, things are going to continue to spiral out of control. So they come up with the Sons of Liberty, democracy, a political system in which power lies with citizens. That's another one we make sure that we have in there, because that's what people are looking for when they start having these protests. So they formed things like the Sons of Liberty. Sons of Liberty was a group, a political group that would always fight against what the British were doing as far as taking American rights away. And one of these things that happened was the tea tax. They did not like the tea, but there was nothing major event to really center on until there was a company that had a lot of tea left over, and they needed to sell it somewhere. And so they came up with a tea tax and tried to sell it to the Americans at a cheaper price. Hey, you're going to pay less for tea, you just got to pay this little tax here. Well, Americans knew if they bought this cheaper tea, which they wanted, that they accepted this tax. And that was like a backdoor way. The British government, hey, well, you paid that tax. Well, you didn't have a problem with that tax. Why would you have a problem with these other taxes? I thought you were about, you know, taxation without representation. Here you paid this tax and you didn't say anything. Well, Americans saw through that and refused to pay the tax. Now let's go back to our three regions colonies. You had the, I forget which one's which, but one of the regions, I think it was the South, just, you know, let it sit there in mid-Atlantic. They sent it back. But in Boston and Massachusetts, they had the Boston Tea Party, 1773. Now, we tend to think of Boston Tea Party as guys coming in and, you know, rock music in the back, you know, blaring and everybody going crazy and hooping and hollering and everybody's just, you know, it's one big riot. Well, it really was just some guys broke in onto some ships, broke a lock, and took the tea and just dropped it in the water, and they had very unconvincing Indian outfits on. And that was it. You know, they just went home, and it was not, you know, I mean, if you played Assassin's Creed and you saw the Boston Tea Party, that is a very bad representation of what actually happened. It was very uneventful, actually. But the British got the message. They knew that the Americans were now destroying their property, and that was something that was not to be tolerated. So they started shutting down the Massachusetts legislature and taking their rights away, and that again just made things worse. So as in response to what happened here, they came up with what was called the Intolerable Acts, or the Coercive Acts. Intolerable Acts, there you go. They closed the port of Boston, and they were forced, you know, they were told you won't open up until you pay for the destroyed tea. So this is a problem not just for Boston. Remember, when we talked about in chapter 4, there was a word there. It was called interdependency. Okay? These colonies were interdependent. They got things from New England, and they sold things to New England. So what affected Massachusetts is now going to affect the other colonies. And this will trigger the Continental Congress being formed, which is when the revolution really gets going. People start to wonder, can we resolve things with Great Britain, or are we going to have to go our separate way?